The forest is silent. Mist rolls across cold water, clinging to the jagged cliffs of an island no one remembers building. Beneath the moss and pine roots, something waits. Pits, carved into stone. Tunnels, dug by hands that moved earth before pyramids rose in Egypt. Hammers, left behind in the dark. This is Isle Royal. And 5,000 years ago, someone turned this place into the largest copper mine the ancient world had ever seen. They didn't write it down. They didn't leave temples or cities. But they moved mountains. They dug deeper than any Bronze Age culture ever dared. And then, without warning, they vanished. This is the story of North America's lost copper empire. A civilization without a name. A mystery that refuses to stay buried. Across the cold waters of Lake Superior, something impossible hides in plain sight. Thousands of ancient mines. Pits torn into bedrock. Shafts that plunge 20 feet into solid stone. And every single one of them, empty. No copper left behind. No veins untouched. Just scars in the earth and questions no one can answer. The first Europeans to reach these shores couldn't believe what they found. French explorers in the 1600s wrote about strange depressions in the ground, old tools made of stone, and stories told by the Anishinaabe, people about ancestors who worked the earth for sacred red metal. But it wasn't until the 1800s that anyone understood the scale. When American mining companies pushed into Michigan's Upper Peninsula, they expected to find virgin copper deposits. What they found instead were ancient excavations. Thousands of them. Pits, so old that trees had grown, died, and rotted away in their depths multiple times over. Someone had been here first, and they'd taken everything. Geologists tried to calculate how much copper had been removed. The numbers didn't make sense. 10,000 tons. Maybe more. Possibly much more. This wasn't casual gathering. This wasn't a handful of people chipping away at surface metal. This was industrial-scale mining. In the Stone Age, the question wasn't just who did this. It was how and why. Let's talk about what we actually know. The Old Copper Complex. That's the name archaeologists gave to the culture responsible for the oldest worked metal in the Americas. Carbon dating places their activity between 4000 and 1000 BC. That's 7,000 years of continuous copper working. For perspective, that's longer than the entire history of ancient Egypt. Their territory stretched across the Great Lakes region. Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Ontario. Everywhere copper could be found in its native form, they were there. And they left behind thousands of tools. Spear points, knives, fishhooks, awls, axes, blades so thin you can see light through them. All of it made from pure copper, shaped without ever melting the metal. This is important. They didn't melt. They didn't cast. They used a technique called cold hammering. You take raw copper, you heat it just enough to make it workable, and you pound it into shape. Over and over. Slowly. Carefully. It's harder than melting. It takes more time. But it produces tools that are incredibly strong, and it requires no advanced furnaces or metallurgy. Just fire, stone hammers, and patience. The mines themselves tell us even more. At Isle Royal, archaeologists have documented over 1,000 ancient mining pits. Some are shallow depressions. Others are deep shafts with wooden ladders, still preserved in the waterlogged soil. They used fire setting, a technique where you build a massive fire against the rock face, let it heat for hours, then douse it with cold water. The thermal shock cracks the stone. Then you go in with hammers and pry bars and pull out the fractured rock. It works. Slowly. Painfully. But it works. And they did it for thousands of years. The hammerstones are everywhere. rounded cobbles of granite and basalt, grooved where wooden handles were once lashed. Some weigh over 20 pounds. Thousands of them have been found abandoned in the pits, left behind when the copper ran out. But here's the thing that keeps archaeologists awake at night. The copper didn't run out. There's still copper in these rocks. The veins aren't exhausted. The ancient miners just stopped. So who were they? That's where the story gets complicated. The old copper complex isn't a single culture. It's a name we gave to a technological tradition, a way of working metal that spread across dozens of different groups over thousands of years. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know their languages. We don't know their stories. But we know they were here. The Anishinaabe people, whose ancestors have lived in this region for thousands of years, have oral traditions about the copper mines. Stories passed down generation after generation. They speak of ancient ones who worked the sacred metal, of spirits in the earth, of respect paid to the stone before it was broken. Some archaeologists believe the old copper complex represents the direct ancestors of later woodland cultures. Others think it's something older, a ghost population that faded before recorded memory. The genetics are murky, the material culture is unique, and the timeline keeps getting pushed back. In the 1950s, radiocarbon dating put the oldest copper tools at around 3000 BC. By the 1980s, new samples pushed that back to 4000 BC. In the 2000s, some sites in Wisconsin yielded dates approaching 5000 BC. That's 7,000 years ago, the same time Sumerians were just beginning to work copper in the Middle East. And here's what makes that staggering. The Old World, Bronze Age, the period that gets all the attention in history books, didn't really kick off until around 3300 BC in the Near East. Bronze itself, that revolutionary alloy of copper and tin, didn't spread across Europe and Asia until much later. But these people, in the forests of North America, were already masters of copper working 1,000 years before that. They just never made the jump to bronze. Why? Maybe they didn't need to. Native copper, the pure metal found in rocks without melting, was abundant. Bronze requires tin, which isn't found anywhere near the Great Lakes. You'd have to trade across vast distances, and the infrastructure for that kind of exchange didn't exist yet. Or maybe the answer is cultural. Maybe their relationship with copper was different. Sacred, not just practical. We don't know, but we know they moved it. Copper artifacts from the Great Lakes have been found across half a continent. Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Missouri, even as far south as Louisiana and Alabama, thousands of miles from the source. This wasn't random. This was trade, organized, deliberate, sustained over centuries. The rivers were their highways. The Great Lakes, their ocean. Canoes loaded with raw copper and finished tools, moving south along the Mississippi, east through the river systems of the Ohio Valley, west into the plains. What did they trade for? We can only guess. Shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rockies, exotic stones, food, furs, things that didn't survive in the archaeological record. But the copper survived, and it shows up everywhere. By 2000 BC, copper tools were being used by cultures across the eastern half of North America. People who never saw a mine. People who lived hundreds of miles from the source. The old copper complex didn't just dig metal out of the ground. They built a trade network, a sphere of influence, an economic system that connected distant peoples for over 2,000 years. In some ways, they controlled the continent, not through conquest, not through empire in the way we usually think of it, but through resource, through knowledge, through the monopoly on the most valuable metal anyone had ever seen. This was North America's first great civilization, and no one remembers their name. Around 1000 BC, something changed. The mines went silent. Copper tools became rare. The trade networks fractured. The old copper complex, after 4,000 years of continuous operation, simply faded away. No one knows why. There's no evidence of invasion, no mass graves, no signs of catastrophic warfare or disease. They just stopped. Some archaeologists think it was environmental. The climate shifted. Forests changed. Game animals migrated. The people followed. Others point to technology. Around the same time the copper culture collapsed, a new innovation spread through the region. Groundstone tools, axes and adzes made not from copper, but from polished granite and basalt. Harder, more durable, and easier to replace. Maybe copper simply stopped being worth the effort. But that doesn't explain the mines. If the shift was purely economic, you'd expect to see a gradual decline, a slow fade as people used less copper over generations. Instead, the archaeological record shows something more sudden. Sites that were active for centuries went dark within a generation or two. It's as if the entire system collapsed at once. There's another theory. Darker, harder to prove. What if the knowledge was lost? Copper working isn't easy. It takes skill, training, years of practice to know how to heat the metal, how hard to strike, how thin you can hammer before it cracks. That knowledge would have been passed down master to apprentice, elder to child. What if something disrupted that chain? A plague, a famine, a social collapse that scattered the mining communities before the skills could be fully taught. We know it happened elsewhere. The Bronze Age collapse in the Mediterranean around 1200 BC wiped out entire civilizations and erased technologies that took centuries to rediscover. Could the same thing have happened here? We don't know, but we know this. By the time Europeans arrived in the 1600s, the native peoples of the Great Lakes region no longer worked copper. They knew about the old mines. They had stories, but the techniques, the tools, the industrial scale operations, all of it was gone, forgotten. Now we need to talk about the Fringe, because the mystery of the missing copper hasn't just fascinated archaeologists. It's attracted attention from people with more exotic theories. Some claim the copper was taken overseas, shipped to Europe or the Mediterranean by ancient seafarers who crossed the Atlantic thousands of years before Columbus. They point to the sheer volume. 10,000 tons of copper vanished from the mines, and only a fraction of that found in North American sites. Where did the rest go? Mainstream archaeology has an answer. It's still here, scattered across the continent in small pieces, buried, lost, corroded beyond recognition, or melted down and reworked by later cultures. But the alternative theorists aren't satisfied. They reference legends. Bronze Age sailors from Phoenicia or Minoan Crete, transoceanic trade routes, ancient inscriptions in Michigan that supposedly show Old World writing. The evidence for this is thin. No verified Bronze Age shipwrecks have been found in the Great Lakes. No Mediterranean artifacts have been conclusively dated to the copper mining period. The inscriptions, when examined by linguists, usually turn out to be natural rock formations or modern hoaxes. But the idea persists. Why? Because the scale is so staggering. Because the engineering is so sophisticated. Because it's hard to accept that a Stone Age culture, working with stone hammers and fire, could have accomplished something this massive. But they did. We have the mines. We have the tools. We have the carbon dates. The old copper complex was real, and it was spectacular. Stand on the shore of Isle Royale today, and you can still see them. The pits, the scars, The wounds in the earth where someone, 5,000 years ago, decided this metal was worth everything. Worth the backbreaking labor. Worth the years of planning. Worth hauling stone hammers up rocky slopes and building fires in the freezing rain. They did it without steel, without wheels, without written instructions. Just human hands, human minds, and a vision that lasted 4,000 years. Longer than Rome. Longer than the dynasties of China. Longer than any empire we remember. And we don't even know their name. That's the tragedy of deep time. The erosion of memory. The way history crumbles like old copper, until even the greatest achievements become mysteries. But the evidence remains. In museum drawers across the Midwest, there are tens of thousands of copper artifacts. Spear points filed so thin they flex in your hand. Knives with edges still sharp after 7,000 years. Fish hooks small enough to catch minnows, crafted with a precision that rivals modern metalwork. Each one is a message. Each one says, "We were here. We were skilled. We mattered." The old copper complex didn't build pyramids. They didn't leave written records. They didn't carve their kings' faces into mountainsides. But they moved a civilization. They built a network that connected thousands of people across a continent. They mastered a technology that wouldn't be replicated in North America for another 3,000 years. And they did it in silence. No fanfare. No monuments. Just work. The kind of work that changes the world without asking for recognition. That's the real lesson here. History isn't just about the loud moments. The battles and the kings and the empires that announce themselves with stone and gold. Sometimes it's about the quiet ones. The miners in the mist. The craftsmen by the fire. The traders paddling upriver with a canoe full of red metal and dreams of what it might buy. Those are the people who built the old copper complex. And those are the people we're still trying to understand. Because even now, after a century of archaeology and 1,000 academic papers, we're only beginning to see the shape of what they created. A civilization without a name. An empire without borders. A people who touched a continent and then walked away. The copper is still there. In the rocks. In the water. In the soil. Waiting. Just like the questions. Who were you? What did you see when you looked out across this water? What did you believe the copper would bring you? We'll probably never know. But we can stand here, on this island of scars, and feel the weight of it. The staggering ambition. The relentless labor. The deep, ancient pull of something valuable enough to shape a culture for 40 centuries. That's not just history. That's a monument. Written not in stone, but in absence. In the empty pits and the silent tools and the copper that traveled 1,000 miles, carrying stories we'll never hear. The old copper complex is gone, but the metal remembers. And so do the stones.